Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started.
Well, welcome back to the Bone, podcasts about athletic training and the things athletic trainers deal with. Today we have Tim White, who is previously an athletic trainer but currently a sports psychologist. He owns White House Athletics and Sports Psychology in Nashville, Tennessee. We crossed paths on LinkedIn. He came across my feed when he posted about the new NCAA regulations on mental health. Mental health is a hot topic right now in the athletic training field, and I don't feel like it's fully being tackled appropriately. So I thought I'd have Tim on to talk about it and how we can better implement resources and support to our athletes and clients. Currently you're in Nashville, but it looked like you've been coast to coast with all your experiences and job opportunities. How has that been being across the country?
It was a lot of fun, a lot of different jobs and going to school in different parts of the country and all of those places. I really enjoyed visiting and spending time in those areas. And I'm always fascinated by the way that it's all the United States, but yet each part of the country can definitely have its own kind of culture and way of doing things, which I really appreciated.
Definitely. Yeah, because from what I got listed is Utah, Missouri, Virginia, Florida, Connecticut, New York. You're in Tennessee. So which coast is the best coast is the big question.
I'm going to ditch the coast. I'm going to say I like the Midwest. I grew up in Minnesota and worked in Michigan for 5 years. That was my last athletic training job. So I appreciate being a little more inland.
Yeah, it does have its pros, I would say.
Sure.
So you are not an active athletic trainer, but you have held your certification.
Yes.
The question is what's your favorite thing about being an athletic trainer and a sports psychologist?
I think I really like the way that there's a lot of opportunity to overlap, to be totally honest. A big part of what kind of put me on the path that I'm on today was all the way back during my master's program, and I was a GA as an athletic trainer, but I was studying sports psychology and I was working with an athlete who had knee surgery, and we were going through the extensive rehab protocol and all of that. And we started to incorporate different relaxation and mental imagery techniques and such into the rehab process to help her manage pain, help her regain her function. And it was really kind of that light bulb moment for me of recognizing, like, we don't really have to operate in complete silos here, or the body doesn't heal in silos. In a lot of ways, the recovery process has a lot of overlap, mind and body. And so that's something that I like, having the background I have and being able to work with athletes at this point on the psychological aspect of their recovery. But the way that I can talk with athletes and I understand the language and the concepts and what they're doing in the rehab process. And even when they tell me about certain things that their athletic trainer is doing with them, and like, I know why, and I understand that aspect of the recovery. And to be totally honest, sometimes I'm actually explaining some of that to the clients I'm working with to help them understand, like, here's what's going on within your rehab. And that's one thing that is a big part of the psychological aspect of recovery, is just knowing and understanding what's going on. And so I really enjoy tapping into the way that there's a lot of overlap, not necessarily in terms of what we're doing, but the way that the recovery process complements each other, both mentally and physically.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's a natural skill that most athletic trainers have, is kind of the sports psychology portion of it? Or do you think that's one barrier that we need to start addressing a little bit more to provide the better care?
Um, I think it's a little bit of both. I know that's not like a definitive answer. I think athletic trainers do a really good job educating their patients on the physical recovery process. I think it's also a space that is easily, I don't want to say overlooked, but it can be hard to get to that space sometimes because athletic trainers are as busy as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be easy to kind of be focused on one thing when maybe there would be a little bit of additional value, taking an extra 5 minutes to outline, okay, here's what's happening within the body. Here's why we're doing this exercise, or why this is an important part of your rehab process. Of course, there's a lot of conversation around how much of this is within the domain and scope of practice of an AT, and how much of it really kind of falls more into the sports psychologist's hands. And I think one space where athletic trainers can work within the domain and within their scope and really be proactive is that patient education. I think we all know it. I think we all try to do a good job with it. But I also think it's a space that sometimes we come up a little bit short as ATs.
Yeah, definitely. So since mental health is a hot topic in athletic training right now, the NCAA has started legislation on providing more robust resources. As we know, in the collegiate setting, there is such a range of resources being able to be provided due to financial restrictions and all that. I think today I wanted to kind of discuss with you what are some of the implications that you're suspecting that we'll see to be able to achieve this new regulation.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start off is, could you go into the importance of wellness and thriving and the implications of mental health in these student athletes?
Yeah, I think health in general, in the mental health and psychology world, there's a lot of talk and emphasis on, mental health is health. Is kind of a hot phrase that a lot of people are using. And when we talk about like the domains of health as athletic trainers, it's so easy to focus on their physical capabilities and well-being. But of course, the mental side of health and well-being is part of it too. And we can go further and dive into things like social well-being and health, even those that are spiritual or religious, kind of spiritual health and well-being. There's these domains of health and well-being that collectively make up the concept of health and well-being. And so it's easy to focus on our specific area or our specific domain. But remembering the importance that it all comes together, it all works together. And more specifically to like athletic training and sports psychology, and where I have most of my expertise is the mind-body connection and the way that we view certain situations or we perceive specific events. That has a huge impact on what happens physiologically. So much of sports psychology as a field is tied to, when something's stressful or I'm under pressure or maybe I'm feeling a little bit anxious about something, the nervous system and our body's physiology literally changes and adapts to that perception. So a lot of the work that we're doing is helping to balance those pieces where how are we thinking about something, or how do we perceive a certain situation, and what do we do to either change that perception or manipulate what's happening in the body to get the mind and body to be working in concert with each other and complementary to each other, as opposed to creating distress or other problems that are going to interfere with performance, interfere with even the rehab process.
So as you were talking about that, to help address the wellness portion, would you say that we need more robust recovery and preparation, maybe a better warm-up or some of those things that help dial people in to their performance aspects? Or are there ways to address it without formal counseling, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, does this require formal counseling or not, and things of that nature. I think, psychological recovery it can be very, I think there's actually a lot of parallels and a lot of areas where we can make comparisons between the mind and the body. So we know a lot about the physical aspects of recovery, Normatec pants and cold tubs and the sports science aspect of things, of how far are we even, taking our athletes in their training and the level of strain that we're putting on their body. Same sorts of concepts can be applied psychologically too. And what am I doing to recover psychologically? How am I having some time and some space to reflect and actively review some of the experiences I've had that day, some of the emotions that I've felt in that day, and also process through some of them a little bit. Is kind of some of those recovery pieces that's more psychological in nature. So those are things that I wouldn't necessarily expect an athletic trainer to know, like the specifics, but certainly athletic trainers can be encouraging of what are you doing in terms of self-care? What are you doing in terms of kind of your mental recovery? What are the things that help you de-stress and decompress throughout the course of the day, and encouraging the athletes to be doing those things?
Yeah. So when we're developing our policies and procedures and dealing with mental health, I've never been super, I wouldn't necessarily say comfortable. I can definitely go in and help somebody that's in distress, but I never thought it was a robust enough policy or procedure ultimately to handle a situation where somebody may be borderline or, not necessarily detrimental or to the point of detriment, but they're showing signs.
Right.
Do you have any pointers on how to create a more preventative policy? How do you catch on to people that are at the brink or starting to experience more symptoms?
Yeah, I think as we're creating policies and procedures, part of the mental health best practices from the NCAA cites having defined referral pathways, and a lot of that is it certainly encompasses like the idea of a mental health emergency action plan. So again, very similar, very parallel to what most athletic trainers think of in terms of a traditional emergency action plan. But in this case, it's a mental health emergency action plan. So I definitely would encourage every school and department to have that, regardless of the fact that, now it's an NCAA expectation. And working with a mental health professional, whether that's somebody that's already on campus or somebody in the community or someone that the institution, has a relationship with and has a trusting connection with, to write out, okay, what does it look like when someone's experiencing a mental health crisis or even a mental health emergency? What is our steps? What are our procedures? How are we going to help that individual get the help that they need in that moment in time? That of course, is a very important piece, but it's also a piece that typically doesn't come up very often. So I think part of what your question is what about more of the day-to-day referral where someone may be exhibiting signs of anxiety or depression or an eating disorder or whatever the case may be? How do we make that more standard or traditional referral? And I think it's the same way or the same thing where have a defined and written out plan. And again, work with a mental health professional to help you establish that process of, does it make the most sense to communicate in this method versus that method? What are some of the ways that we can do things like a quote unquote warm handoff where, the athletic trainer may walk with the athlete to that professional's office and say, I would really encourage this athlete to set up some sessions with you and schedule that first appointment. Or maybe it's if the athlete calls the office and schedules that first appointment over the phone, how can the athlete help them make that call and be a source of support there? Really leaning into the mental health professionals that are around you and creating those policies together, I think is a really important approach to take so that, we can tap into the expertise of the mental health professional, but at the same time, the athlete is able to provide kind of insights and context around the fact that they're with the athletes almost every day.
I know that at a previous job, we started putting together performance seminars.
Yep.
Would this be a way to help address and educate, I guess, would be having regular, I don't know if you'd hit different topics on, signs and symptoms or different variables that may cause increased mental health symptoms, that type of thing. How often would you say someone should maybe host those on campus?
Yeah. The performance seminars, I'm kind of thinking about two different things here. Like the performance piece is definitely something that's going to grab an athlete's attention. If I'm struggling in my sport in some capacity, and I'm wanting to perform better than I am, maybe I'm having a hard time focusing or concentrating, or coach has really been harping on me lately, or I'm fighting for playing time and stuff like that. The performance side of sports psychology is something that is a quote unquote like easy entry to help promote athletes to utilize various forms of sports psychology and mental health services. But then even kind of thinking about just that seminar concept and what you're bringing up here of, having consistent, whether it's a seminar or presentation or invited speaker or something like that, where the consistent education can be really helpful, not just for the athletes, but also for the staff. I know some schools will do things like a lunch and learn. Okay, bring your lunch and we're going to talk about this topic for, the lunch hour or even 30 minutes or whatever the case may be. So creating those opportunities for people to hear and learn and gain some more education and insight. Absolutely. I would recommend that.
Okay. So with smaller departments that may have limited resources, how would be the best way for an athletic trainer to get help or gain resources, would you say?
Yeah. If you do, I'm actually going to go on a little bit of a tangent. I'll answer your question, but it's not quite a direct answer. I would really challenge schools that have, smaller departments, smaller schools, places that don't have the big budgets of the power conferences. 10 or 15 years ago, most of the power conferences most of those schools were kind of saying the same sort of thing, like, well, we don't really know if we have the budget for this, or maybe they had somebody on campus, but do we really have the budget for a second or third clinician? And, 10 or 15 years later, they do. They have the providers, they have the resources. And so to take this a little bit further, these smaller schools as an institution as a whole, like the athletic department's not making money. So technically the school doesn't have the budget for athletics at all.
Yeah.
But yet they still have it. And so it highlights the fact that athletics is important enough that we're willing to do it, even though we don't technically have the ability to self-sustain. And the athletic department is kind of funded by the overall university. And so again, it's not necessarily a popular thing to think about. But when we think about kind of mental health and well-being, it needs to be important enough that we're willing to spend the money on it anyway.
Yeah.
How long did it take for schools to have several, multiple athletic trainers? At some point in time, there was only one athletic trainer.
Yeah.
And before that, there wasn't any. And so it has to be something that schools look at their situation and say, is this important enough that we're willing to come up with a budget? Now, that's certainly a bit kind of philosophical in nature and kind of bigger picture. So like maybe a little more of a practical type of perspective that I can offer is there's certainly kind of value and benefit in if there's somebody in your community that you can contract with and take an approach where maybe I don't necessarily have the ability to pay a full-time salary, but we can contract with this individual in the community that we know has the appropriate education and training to truly do sports psychology. And maybe we have that person come in 2 or 3 days a week kind of thing. And that way you're not paying a full annual salary. It's more of it's a smaller sum of money that's probably easier to come up with. Or, certainly thinking about some of the other ways that we can get into things like guest speaking or, invited presentations and things of that nature. Obviously athletic departments can get pretty creative there. So it's a tough question for sure. And of course, a very important one and one that schools are kind of being forced to really think about, given the fact that all member institutions have to be compliant in the next roughly year.
So when the small schools are looking to provide resources and they might not have the funding, what are some recommendations that you can provide?
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts that I have here. One of the things that I think is really important is to consider the fact that as a smaller school, so maybe a school that doesn't have as much resources or as many funds and things of that nature, I hear that a lot. And at the same time, I also think it's really important to really consider some of these pieces of why is that your immediate response? Because there's always things at a professional organization, a company, a university, et cetera, that, hypothetically, they don't really have the funds for, but they still have it. And so really kind of digging into some of these pieces of what makes this important and why are we going to find a way to come up with the funds, So part of that is kind of finding the things that we can do, even though we're not in a position to necessarily like hire a full team of professionals or even hire one professional. Some schools may struggle with that aspect of their budget. And so some of the different ways that they can get creative with this challenge that they're facing is to start looking at, okay, how can we maybe build some of this into a team's budget as opposed to hiring someone for the entire department? Maybe a team can have a line in their budget that is dedicated to, mental health or sports psychology, mental performance sessions. Some of the high schools that I work with, they bring me in, once a month, and that's something that they can afford. They can build that into the team's budget. Same thing with some of the local colleges. Again, not super big programs or institutions or whatever, but for that particular team, they're able to build that into their overall budget. Thinking about bringing teams together. It doesn't have to be just the basketball team, just the baseball team, just the gymnastics team, et cetera. If there are 2 or 3 teams that could come together and hold a session as a joint group and have some sort of presentation, workshop, seminar, things of that nature, there's a way for these teams to work together in that kind of way. Another thing I think about is the value of educating the coaches, bringing people in who can provide some of that education and insight and have that be something that this isn't just for your benefit or well-being, but here's how you as a coach can turn around and take this to practice and share it with your coaches and implement it into things that you're doing during your training sessions. Universities love donors and donors love to champion causes. And so I promise you, if you get with your development team and you make this something that you kind of create some sort of specific, hey, we're trying to build a specific program, and this is what the program looks like. And your development team can take that and share that with the donors. To be totally honest, there are probably some people that maybe wouldn't be super excited about donating at all. But then when you present this concept and this idea of this is what we're trying to raise money for, and you're able to lay out some of the specific details, you're going to catch somebody, or at least a couple different people that might be able to collectively put together some funds that could be used in that way. And it's hard because it's so easy to talk about this in terms of funds and money. But I think there's so much to be said about it's not just a money thing, especially in their creativity aspect of this question of how can we build programming that isn't just tied to like one-on-one sessions? How can we build programming that isn't just tied to, bringing in a practitioner like myself or contracting with a company or whatever? Looking at, can we create pre-recorded videos and contents that could be useful for a certain person or group of individuals in a specific way or specific situation? How can we put together some like educational reading, a series of recommended books, recommended articles, things of that nature, continuing to get creative with how we're finding a way to find a solution. And that's probably how I'll end my answer here is, as during the athletic training portion of my career, there were absolutely times where it was like, we all know, like, coach comes and says, I need this player to be able to play tonight. Yeah, and of course, there are those moments where you hold that line and just like, sorry, coach, it's just not safe for them to play. But there are also those instances where having that challenge from the coach be something where you get creative and you find a way. And you put the time and the energy and you come up with ideas that maybe you didn't think about before, or you ask your colleagues some of the things that they might do in that specific situation. And really, I think that spirit is a pretty important spirit as we think about this question of we're a smaller school, we're a smaller department. We don't have the budgets that the power schools have. Of course not. But at the same time, leaning into that athletic competitive spirit that says find a way and make it something that's important enough that you will engage in that level of creativity and exploration and ultimately find an answer that meets your needs. So handful of options there. And ultimately, I'd love to see what schools come up with outside of what I suggested.
Yeah. So you'd say probably starting to weave a culture in rather than just plugging someone in randomly is the way to go ultimately. And then, so not saying that you cookie cut it, but if you're able to create something that you can replicate multiple times, that kind of takes the pressure off of having an actual person there all the time, correct?
Yeah. I think the example of the cookie cutter is actually a really good kind of thought to keep in mind, because right now so many people are thinking, okay, we need to address this need, therefore we need to hire this person. And that's where I think a lot of the smaller schools and departments are running into trouble with, because there's kind of this singular answer to a larger problem. But the reality is that there's dozens of answers to an individual or singular problem. And, I think back to, how athletic training has evolved. And, I'm old enough, and the portion of my athletic training education and career and so on, I had a traditional GA position where, with the athletic training degree transitioning to the master's level, and a lot of those GA positions kind of disappeared. But keep in mind that the GA position is one of the ways that athletic departments got creative in being able to get more people to support their teams. The fact that they were able to work with younger professionals, people who were still in their training and development, who were early in their career and pursuing that graduate degree at that point in time. Same sort of thing. How could we tap into a relationship with, some sort of educational program or some sort of training program that's part of, kind of a university or even a local professional in the community, like my situation, and be able to stretch our dollar a little bit further than if we were to stick to that definitive, well, this is what everybody's doing. Everybody's hiring the full-time person in-house, et cetera, et cetera. But, hypothetically, you can get a handful of interns or GAs or whatever for the same kind of line item cost as you would a full-time person. Oh, of course, you don't want to kind of use and abuse that kind of system, but at the same time, it's another way to be creative.
Well, both parties are benefiting ultimately because they're getting reps.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because it's a win-win-win across the athletic department, for the individual who is getting those reps, exactly like you say, but also the student athletes. They're getting the service they need, um, and the department is doing it in a creative way that ultimately helps a whole nother party all at the same time.
Yeah. So with AED access, I know that there's certain grants that are available to help, high schools that don't have access to AEDs. Most colleges have them. But are there grants specifically for mental health resources that you've seen?
I'm gonna say yes and no. I'm gonna say yes because I know they're out there. The reason I say no is because I can't give you like specific names or specific grants that schools could go and pursue. But they're out there. There's grants for everything, just like there's a donor for everything. There's grants for everything. And put in a little bit of time, a little bit of energy, you'll find one that you could pursue, and that's another creative option, 100%. And again, kind of referencing some of the ways that my business has actually collaborated with local high schools, which have even fewer resources than a college or university. For a student that maybe this is kind of an area of interest, or maybe even a quote unquote passion project. Even being able to tap into that a little bit of, this individual is really interested in this. They want to fulfill some sort of component of their coursework or some sort of project or something like that. And hey, maybe part of that is writing a grant or submitting a proposal, and finding the organizations that might be offering that kind of funding. It really kind of goes back to the leaning into that spirit of, I'm going to find a way.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a, just like I was challenged by coaches to get that player ready for the game. If I may kind of challenge some of these departments to, really kind of think about, am I going to make this enough of a priority that I will get creative enough to find a solution that will fit my department?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, and with the operations of athletics being primarily in the evening with an outside sports psychologist, I mean, I know you can't speak for everybody, but do you think they would be willing to be on call after hours if there was an issue or something? I guess I'm still learning on the response time of, okay, you're kind of having an issue. I mean, I don't think it's going to escalate in the next 12 hours, so maybe we can get you in tomorrow. But do you think that many sports psychologists would have that window open of, hey, like, they're really having symptoms right now, like, would you be able to jump on the phone with them? I don't know how open they are, because obviously athletic trainers work in such odd hours comparatively.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the education piece of like, what constitutes a mental health emergency and therefore needs immediate attention? What constitutes more of an urgent issue that maybe doesn't have to be addressed tonight, but should be addressed within the next 24 hours? And then what constitutes more of that traditional referral where, this is something that needs attention, but if they're not able to get in until 3, 4, 5, 6 days from now, that's still, acceptable or appropriate kind of thing. And so that goes back to the policies and procedures aspect of things, of making those terms very clear and defining, like, when does this need immediate attention? When can it wait 12 hours or even a handful of days? In those more emergent scenarios, typically those are situations where people are tapping into other resources anyway. And so as an example, 988 is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And that is a resource that, we share with all of our clients. And typically more specific to different campuses, typically the school has some sort of relationship or connection to either like a local hospital or some other sort of crisis line.
Mm-hmm.
And in those situations, you're probably tapping into those resources versus like this specific sports psychology professional.
Yeah.
So it helps kind of navigate that scenario of most sports psychology professionals don't work, quote unquote, the off hours or the evening hours, but at the same time, it's not like you're left kind of scrambling or high and dry in those instances, because there's still this like, this is the resource to kind of lean into if those types of situations happen during those times of the day, kind of thing. And again, that's all part of that bigger emergency action plan.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with your performance facility, White House, are you guys taking insurance or are you guys cash-based, I guess? I'm not sure what the relationship with insurance and sports psychologists are right now.
Yeah, it varies. Some clinicians are paneled with various insurance companies. Some clinicians are cash-based or out of network per se. And that doesn't mean athletes can't necessarily use their insurance. It leans more into kind of some nuances that probably is a separate conversation, but it's kind of the how does the insurance get used kind of thing. But it varies. Some people, they practice to practice. It just kind of depends on kind of individual preference.
Yeah, definitely. So when we're looking for these outside providers as athletic trainers, with athletics, that's very a niche market.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure not all sports psychologists really cover in depth the ins and outs of sports. How would you suggest an athletic trainer interviews potential sports psychologists to work with their athletics department?
Yeah, you bring up a really important point of just kind of not only how do we interview, but how do we make sure they're actually qualified?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people who are saying like, yeah, I do sports psychology, but it's really a question of, are they truly doing sports psychology? It's easy to say I'm doing sports psychology, but am I actually doing sports psychology? Mm-hmm. And I think as athletic trainers, if you're having these types of conversations and conducting interviews and so on, I think it's perfectly reasonable and appropriate to ask for qualifications. You know, like not just do you have a psychology license or a mental health license, but do you have any formal sports psychology education and training? Yeah. And if so, what? You know, my master's degree was strictly sports and performance psychology, whereas my PhD was clinical psychology, counseling psychology with an emphasis in sport. Mm. And the reason I highlight that is because the courses I took in my master's sports psychology degree, those were completely different courses than the courses I was taking during my counseling psychology degree.
Yeah.
And so, you know, getting transcripts and what classes were they taking, do they have any sort of formal internship or postdoc training that was a designated sports psychology experience versus, you know, like, yeah, I'm licensed as a psychologist and I like athletes or I like sports. So that doesn't mean somebody's doing sports psychology.
Yeah.
One credential that you can be looking for is the Certified Mental Performance Consultant. It's often abbreviated CMPC. Not all sports psychologists have it, but it is one way that as an athletic trainer, you can identify if this person has that credential. I know they have at least a minimum level of education and training in the domain of sport and performance psychology.
Check out clinicallypressed.org/courses for access to free CEUs for athletic trainers. Register and enroll in as many CEUs as you'd like. New CEUs coming on a monthly basis, including from your host of To the Bone with Shelby Daly. Get ahead of your CEUs by listening to podcasts and getting credit for it. Clinically Pressed Company, making complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org.
Okay. So when we're working with a sports psychologist as an athletic trainer, how much can we actually require from the athlete if they are having symptoms of mental health? Can we require them to go see the counselor? I know it's a very fine line of aggravating symptoms, but in the past I've been told, like, you can suggest it, but you can't require it. But as an athletic trainer for treating mental health as an injury, quote unquote, how can I comfortably have them keep participating if I feel like they're going to keep deteriorating with their mental symptoms?
Yeah. Very, very delicate topic, as you note, right? Like, there's a lot of protection around kind of the confidentiality and what can somebody be required to do, and it even gets into like the specific laws, and of course it's going to vary a little bit state by state. But generally speaking, what you've heard is accurate. Like, you can't force someone to go to therapy. The only time, I shouldn't say the only time, that's too definitive, but generally speaking, someone can't be forced to seek assistance outside of a handful of specific situations, which typically involve risk of harm to themselves or another person. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm certainly not trying to speak for every state or be super definitive in a legal sense, but you are right in that instance. The challenge, I appreciate the challenge that you're referencing of, if I'm an athletic trainer and somebody's well-being is deteriorating, of course, absolutely encourage them to seek assistance. But I don't know that you're really in a position to say, no, you can't play unless X, Y, and Z. I think where you may have a little bit of wiggle room is in that sense of, when I was doing athletic training, I would often ask myself and think about, like, is participating first and foremost safe? Like, is it safe for them to participate? Mm-hmm. And if we have a yes there, then I would move on to the next question of, does participating put them at undue risk for further injury or new injury of some sort? Mm-hmm. That doesn't perfectly translate into the mental health space. And as much as we want to be able to kind of protect them from themselves, unfortunately, as an athletic trainer, we can be pretty limited in that way. So to be totally honest, to get a clear, kind of more definitive answer there, I think that's something that athletic trainers would need to work with team physicians and even legal counsel who has some sort of expertise in mental health to really kind of identify what the parameters and limitations are.
So I guess to protect myself as an athletic trainer, if I do have someone that I can't require to go get help, I mean, this may aggravate the whole situation, but could I have them sign an AMA kind of situation? With all the legal stuff going on, how do you actually protect yourself in that type of situation where you may have evidence that they are deteriorating or their performance is being affected, or, with eating disorders, it's causing stress injuries or female triad, that type of stuff. Yeah. Is there any way to actually protect myself as an athletic trainer in this mental health space?
I think I would turn again to that idea of working with legal counsel and a physician. Like with the eating disorder example, that one's a little bit easier than, say, something like a depression or an anxiety. In the eating disorder scenario where somebody's I'm trying to think of how to explain it, but their eating disorder has started to create injury. Like, in a way, you're not necessarily holding them out as an athletic trainer because of the eating disorder. It's more of like, well, now you have a stress injury type of thing. And so that's where there's some of that nuance comes into play, where that is nuanced as it is. It's a little bit clearer in terms of, well, you have stress injury, so that's why you're not cleared to participate.
Yeah.
Something more like an anxiety, if it's leading to physical injury, I think there's a parallel there that you can probably work with. Kind of depression, maybe the same thing. If it's leading to physical injury, you can kind of lean on your professional responsibility, especially to their physical care.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as is something that's more of, your anxiety's causing X, Y, and Z, and those symptoms are just really hindering your overall life versus like an injury, that gets a lot stickier for sure. So even myself as a sports psychologist, I would be turning to legal counsel to kind of further understand that. And to be totally honest, that is a challenge that kind of the whole field is dealing with, because now schools and athletes and so on are getting into some of these conversations of, even something like a medical red shirt or a medical leave of absence or things of that nature, when historically all of that's been tied to physical injury. But now we're starting to look at it from a mental health perspective. How are we defining the parameters and what does or doesn't constitute something that would warrant a red shirt or an extra year of eligibility or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
So I wish I had a better answer for you, but as you can tell, that space is very muddy.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's why I wanted to have you on, to show that we don't really have all the answers, but then they're putting these regulations on us, and it's, well, how do we fully navigate this then of making sure we're providing the best care?
Yeah.
So that's always my trouble with regulations is, well, there's no definitive answers at this point, so I'm not sure how to carry this out.
Yeah. Well, and I think as I've read through the mental health best practices and such, I think they're written vague enough that it allows schools a lot of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, there's enough concrete information that they can enforce it.
Yeah, definitely. So as an athletic trainer, obviously referring is going to be the best thing to do. If a patient or athlete is non-compliant with the referral, what are the next best ways to help them deal? We talked about maybe recovery tactics. Is sleep the best prescription? Do they have an ICD code for requiring people to go to sleep?
Yeah. Sleep, of course, is something that comes up a lot in the mental health space. It comes up a lot in conversations about student athletes, especially college student athletes, and we know that generally speaking, they're overscheduled and don't have enough time in the day to do everything they're quote unquote supposed to do. The promoting sleep, yes, absolutely. The more you can encourage and promote it and help athletes recognize the benefits, and sleep hygiene is a topic that we get into a lot in the world of sports psychology, and how they can have some of those consistent routines and schedules and processes to help their mind and body calm down and relax enough that they can actually fall asleep. It's a lot of times athletes struggle to fall asleep, and at the same time, some athletes are so tired they fall asleep as soon as they hit the pillow, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. Sleep is interesting because there's a lot to be said, or a lot of it is tied to how do we help you, how do we set you up to fall asleep? Sleep is kind of funky in the way that you can't try hard to fall asleep. You actually have to let go enough to let yourself fall asleep.
Yeah.
And then, have enough hours in the evening to not just get the recommended amount of sleep, but then also this aspect of sleep quality. Maybe I'm asleep for 7 hours, but am I getting into those deeper REM cycles where a lot of the kind of rest, recovery, rejuvenation, rest really comes from? Or am I staying in more of those lighter cycles of sleep or portions of sleep? So
Gotcha.
absolutely promote sleep.
And then with pre-participation examinations, I mean, I'm out of the traditional sense at this point for about a year or two now. It's been very lightly touched in previous pre-participation examinations of mental health diagnosed or undiagnosed symptoms. Is there an actual screen that you would recommend or tool for athletic departments to use in their pre-participation exams to try to catch some of these habits or symptoms?
Mm-hmm. I personally like the sports mental health assessment tool. It's something that was developed by the International Olympic Committee, and it's designed in a way to kind of create a sequence or sequence of steps or sequence of layers where it starts with some generally broad kind of questions and gathering information, and then depending on how the athlete answers those questions, either they're not somebody that kind of warrants further attention with regard to their mental health, or they would warrant some sort of follow-up, and then the follow-up includes kind of another set of questions and conversations and such. I've used it a handful of times in my experience and in my work, and I found it very useful. It's very easy to conduct or implement. And another reason I like this tool is because it's covering a fairly broad number of topics. I know a lot of athletic departments have kind of turned to your most common anxiety screening tool or your most common depression screening tool. But of course, those are only 2 topics, whereas the SMAT, as it's abbreviated, anxiety, depression, eating, body image, sleep, et cetera, et cetera. It's covering a range of topics that increase the ability to make sure that we're catching people and minimizing the chances of people kind of falling through the cracks, per se.
Yeah, definitely. And then how often would you say the screen should happen? Should it really only be at the pre-participation examination, or should it be through the season or end of season? How often do you think it should be administered?
Yeah. Like you say, most people are doing at least kind of the annual every year at PPEs kind of thing. I think my suggestion would be more as at a minimum twice a year, or maybe, because everyone goes through PPEs in the fall, and typically in the fall, there's a general kind of excitement and enthusiasm. We're back at school. I'm back with my friends. I'm, getting ready for a new season, which that can influence, how somebody feels at that moment in time, and therefore how they answer the questions. So I would definitely encourage a follow-up at some point during the wintertime. Maybe, if you're trying to hit kind of that every 6 months type of approach, or, some point in the middle portion of the season. For the fall sports, October is a very heavy month, not just as an athlete, but also as a student. And that's when counseling centers tend to be the most busy for a reason. And so I think it makes sense, to have that additional checkpoint, in the middle of the fall for the winter sports. Same sort of thing. Like, okay, maybe this semester isn't quite as heavy, but my season's getting really heavy.
Yeah.
And that would be another good time to have that checkpoint. And then the spring sports, same sort of idea. Probably somewhere around, the spring break, maybe a little bit after, knowing that a lot of spring sports tend to extend beyond the end of the school year.
Yeah. And then to wrap it up, so an athlete exiting their sport, getting ready for graduation or is graduating, depending on what sport they're doing, how can we better support those athletes in the transition of their athletic career?
Yeah. One of the schools I used to work with, I think actually did a pretty good job with this, where they actually would collect a number of resources from the different departments. So the athletic trainers, the strength staff, the nutrition staff, the sports psychology staff, and, kind of create this mini packet of here are things that you can do to kind of maintain or continue to be active and have healthy eating habits and maintain a body image and sense of self that's healthy and productive. And not only did they have, this packet of resources, but also would actually gather the students together in a seminar type of setting and kind of talk through each of these pieces and not only say, here are some bits of information to take with you, but also let's explain it and let's let you ask questions and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the send-off is ultimately the hardest part, is you kind of cut loose and never see them again.
Yeah. Well, and let me throw in one more piece there from more of the mental health or sports psych side of things. So much of the challenge of transitioning out of sport is the way that sport has been a source of kind of meaning and purpose for such a long time for that athlete. And so a huge part of the athlete transition is identifying new sources of meaning or new sources of, that sense of purpose in what they're doing. Certainly for some people, it's, they find a lot of value and meaning in transitioning into the working world. But for other athletes, it may be, well, but I still want to be really active and involved in this or that. And so being able to help them find those new activities or ways to be involved in different things that give them a sense of meaning and purpose is a huge part of it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, was there anything else you wanted to hit on before we get into our closing questions?
No, I think it's been great to kind of dive through things. I know you're asking really good questions because obviously some of them aren't crystal clear as much as we would like them to be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's just the evolution of our care and how do we do it better.
Yes.
So I know that you're not actively in athletic training, so I'll say sports medicine. What trends are you most excited about in the realm of sports medicine coming up?
I think just the way that sports medicine, athletic training is spending more time and energy on that kind of the whole athlete. And of course, kind of from my perspective, the sports psychology, the mental health aspect of things, it's for so long, so many pieces have been kind of broken apart and put into their individual silos. And the more that athletic training and sports psychologists and other professionals embrace the kind of integrated care aspect of things, I think that's exciting, because as much as we want to understand things on very deep and detailed levels, we have to remember the way that they all influence each other.
Yeah. And then what are some resources that you would recommend an athletic trainer to learn more about mental health or the sports psychology portion of treating an athlete?
Yeah. So honestly, there's actually a couple of textbooks. I think Sports Psychology for Athletic Trainers is one of them. And to be totally honest, I'm blanking on the other one. If you don't give me 2 seconds.
No, yeah, you can go get it.
You're going to edit this, right?
Yes.
I saw that question. I knew I should have grabbed these before. Okay. So getting back to it, I actually misquoted the title. Psychosocial Strategies for Athletic Training is one book that is written more from the athletic training angle. I think that's a really good textbook for people to have. Another one is Psychosocial Intervention and Referral. Again, geared more towards athletic trainers. In fact, it's called The Athletic Trainer's Guide to Psychosocial Intervention and Referral. So that's this one here.
Perfect.
And then the last one, this one's geared more towards sports psychology professionals, but this is The Psychology of Sport Injury and Rehab.
Perfect.
These are all books that I have clearly on my shelf right over there.
Quick reference.
Yes, quick reference. And I do pull them out and kind of look at different things from time to time. Even though I've worked as an athletic trainer for, over a decade, and I've worked in the sports psychology space for several years as well, I still go back to some of these textbooks and some of the recommendations and such that are in there.
Yeah. Well, that's great to know. I know finding good resources is hard there's just so many these days. So trying to narrow down what's going to be useful and efficient to keep on my shelf is definitely something I look forward to.
Yeah. And even the, more and more research in the journal articles and stuff, whether it's Journal of Athletic Training or, Journal of Applied Sports Psychology, both spaces are definitely publishing more articles about the psychological aspects of rehab and recovery and so on. So keep those top of mind as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Again.
Yes.
Maybe we'll do one just on sleep. I won't fall asleep though.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, no, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our time together.
Perfect. Well, have a great day.
You too.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It is hosted and produced by Shelby Daily, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.